In the chapter 11, we will talk about some fundamental things about the nervous system and also review our nervous tissue. Remember, when we talk about the nervous tissue, it's made with a neuron and a neuroglial cell. The neuroglial cell, we just see everything beside the neurons are neuroglial. So this time in this chapter, we will further divide the neuroglial to identify those different type of neuroglial cells. So the nervous system is a system that have all those nervous tissue. So think what is the function of the nervous system. The nervous system control and communicate with the environment and control your body. Basically, it sense the environment around you and do those different response in response to the change in the environment. So in this nervous system, it's the fast system that can respond to the stimulus around the environment. So if somebody step on your toe, you know the pain and you just retract your foot. So that is controlled by the nervous system. Okay, so the cells in the nervous system will communicate via electrical and chemical signals. That's why it's so fast. Most of them are wired and use those lines here, like in this picture. Those are the nerve. So all those electrical signals go in and go into the spinal cord, go into the brain. Okay, it's like if your finger get pinched and you just receive all the information from the finger to the brain, and it's most of them are electrical signals and have chemical signals relay between the different cells. Okay, so that make the nervous system is like a wired phone system. Okay, just inside your body, and one place talk to another by wire, and those wire we call it a neuron, we call it a nerve. Okay, so it's a very fast and quite specific. If a pinch on the finger, you can feel it and you know it's on the finger. Okay, so those response, those sense, you can sense it almost immediately. Okay, someone step on your toe and you can feel it and retract immediately because your nervous system are so fast. You don't take forever to know, well, it's stepped on and I should retract my feet. At that point, maybe that tissue get too damaged. Okay. So the nervous system include the input part and also output. That's a function of the nervous system. First, you receive the sensory input. It's something either you see, you hear, or even you smell. Okay, all those are received by a sensory organ or some sensory neurons. So the information gathered and by those sensory receptors. Those are the input, and they go into the brain, go into the central nervous system. And inside the brain part, you think and process those information. For example, if you see a cup of water, okay, and your brain just receive the information, your eye see it, that's a sensory input, and your brain will think, yes, I'm thirsty, I want to drink it. That's a procession, and that is an integration part. We call it integration. That is processing of those sensory input. And since your brain make the decision, so you think, I want to drink it, then your brain will control your muscle to move your hand to grab that cup of water, which is output here. That's a motor output, and it activates the effector, which in this example, that will be the muscle. That will be the muscle on the arm and forearm to grab this cup of water and move it to your mouth to drink it. So those are the output, motor output, which control your muscle. Okay, so that is the whole process of the function of the nervous system. And sometimes you don't really think like the process like I just said. If someone just get shocked or like scared, and then start to sweat, that process is controlled by the nervous system as well. So just get shocked, and then the nervous system receive those shock, either like a present of a lion or tiger, and those just make you so scared. Then your sweat glands start to secret sweat out. Okay, that process is controlled by the nervous system, but it's not really you want the sweat gland to sweat. It's not necessary to be voluntary or a conscious control. Okay, either the effector may be a muscle or sometimes a gland. Okay. So first, let's divide the nervous system. If we see the whole nervous system, we see that include the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves. Okay, those are the organs in the nervous system. And the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system is the normal division of the nervous system, central and the peripheral. So you can think by location. The central part that will include the brain and the spinal cord, which is a central nervous system, only have the brain and the spinal cord. And those are the part to integrate all those information. So your brain have thinking function, and also your spinal cord can integrate those information as well. So for very simple reflex, it's normally integrated just within the spinal cord. Okay, and that's a central nervous system. So if the one which is on the side, we call them peripheral nervous system for PNS. Okay, so that is a PNS, you see, peripheral nervous system, and the CNS. The CNS is for the central nervous system. So the PNS will contain all the things except the CNS, as long as it belongs to the nervous system and not part of the brain, not part of the spinal cord. Those are the PNS. Okay, so it's the portion of the nervous system outside the CNS. It's a peripheral. That's why we say it's a peripheral to the CNS. Okay, so in that PNS here, there's a majority is the nerve. Those nerves are the PNS. Those nerves come from the brain and the spinal cord, which are like the wire of your nervous system. Okay, if you can further divide those nerves. Spinal nerves come from the spinal cord. Cranial nerve come from the brain. Cranial means brain, so that is a cranial nerve. And the PNS can be further divided to two different divisions by their function. One is a sensory, the other is a motor. So the sensory division are the part contain all the input, sensory input, and we call those input as a afferent. Remember the directional term when we learn in the lab? Afferent means send those information from the peripheral, from the organ, from the skin to the CNS. That is afferent, and those division contains all the nerve send those information to the CNS, towards the CNS. Okay, and the other side we have the motor division. Motor are the output because it controls the movement, or well, every output we call it motor division. So it may control the gland. Okay, and those are the afferent. Remember the directional term, afferent with the E means the sense send out. So if you see afferent and afferent, you need to able to know the direction. Okay, afferent, which one send in and which one send out. Afferent is a send in and afferent send out. Okay, the E send out. That's the output. Okay, so here is output, and the afferent is the input. Okay. For the two different division, it can be further divided by either the target or the receptor that on the peripheral part. If those are for the sensory division, we can separate them to the somatic and visceral. Somatic, which means body. The somatic sensory fibers receive information from skin, skeletal muscle, and the joints. So the body parts, we'll call it body parts. And the visceral Remember the word visceral, which means organ. That just means organ. So those sensory fibers receive information from the inner organs. We call it visceral organs, like heart, lungs, stomach, intestine, even blood vessels. Okay, those are the visceral sensory fibers that just receive information from the visceral organ. Okay, and the motor division can be separate into somatic and autonomic. We don't call it visceral; those are the autonomic. In fact, those two are for somatic is a voluntary control, and autonomic, those are the involuntary control, because motor division is a control and output. So let's look at the motor division of the PNS. We can separate them to the somatic and autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system, if you just see somatic nervous system, you are consider it to be a motor control. Okay, that is a motor, that's a control part, which control the muscle, skeletal muscle only. In fact, if you see somatic nervous system, those are the nervous system that control all your skeletal muscle. What is the function of your skeletal muscle? Skeletal muscle moves your body, right? But there's one more very important function, or we see the characteristic of a skeletal muscle compared to the smooth and cardiac muscle. What is the difference of the skeletal muscle compared to the other two muscle tissue? It's a voluntary. Skeletal muscle are voluntary. The reason we call skeletal muscle are voluntary because they are controlled by a voluntary nervous system. Those are the somatic nervous system, which is voluntary nervous system control the voluntary muscle. So now we put those things together. Okay, voluntary, those are the conscious control. Skeletal muscle are all under the conscious control. So that makes sure that if you go just a loss of consciousness, then all the skeletal muscle are out of control. Okay, they are just nothing control them because the nervous system is not active. Compared to the other division of the motor system, motor division is an autonomic nervous system. Autonomic nervous system, most of the time you will see it as an ANS. The ANS for autonomic nervous system is a visceral motor nerve fiber. Visceral for organs, but in fact, ANS are the nervous system control all those involuntary. If it's involuntary control, as long as it's a control, those should be motor division. Okay, so those involuntary controls which regulate smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands, that should be controlled by the ANS. Okay, so far, if I give you an example, like ask for those motor division of the PNS, which one controls the skeletal muscle? That is a somatic nervous system. And which of the motor division control the smooth muscle? Smooth muscle is controlled by the ANS. So think about those control, those target. Are they voluntary or involuntary? If they are voluntary, those are controlled by the somatic. If it's involuntary, those are controlled by the ANS. Glands are involuntary, cardiac muscle are involuntary, so those are regulated or controlled by the ANS. Okay, so for the ANS, we can further divide it to two different subdivisions. That's from the ANS, which is a sympathetic and a parasympathetic. These two work in opposite, just totally opposite to each other. The sympathetic control your alert system, so it's when you get scared, stressed, it just gives you all those function and control all the organ you need to fight or to flee away. Okay, those are the sympathetic, and the parasympathetic are the one that control things, control those involuntary controls. When you are relaxed, we call it a housekeeping part, housekeeping system. That's a parasympathetic. In our book, here is a good picture and chart show you how those division, how it divide in the nervous system. The whole nervous system have a CNS and PNS. So the CNS part is only the central, that's a CNS called central nervous system, which have the brain and the spinal cord. And the PNS have all the nerves, which is peripheral. And the PNS can be further divided and depends on the direction, how the information is sent. If it's input, those are the sensory division, and if those are the output which control different part of your body, those are the motor division. And the motor division can be further divided into somatic and autonomic system. Somatic nervous system and autonomic system, one is a voluntary and the other is an involuntary. So that gives you an idea if you see the control target. If it's a voluntary, like skeletal muscle, those are controlled by the somatic nervous system. And everything else are normally involuntary, like a gland, like a heart, or like smooth muscle. Those are controlled by the autonomic nervous system. And autonomic nervous system, the ANS, can be further divided into two different divisions. Those are not separated by the target. In fact, for all those organs that can be controlled or regulated by the ANS, they all have these two different divisions. One is to make it to calm down. The other is just reverse the function, make it to lift up this activity. So those two kind of regulate those organs in totally two different directions. For example, the sympathetic is always make your body be ready and always mobilize the body system during the activity. So like when you get scared, when you get afraid, so that's a time that you are so stressed and all those blood will go into the heart, go into your skeletal muscle, make you are ready to run away. Okay, so those autonomic system just increase your heart rate. Okay, and also sometimes also your breathing rate. All those are controlled by the autonomic, or we say sympathetic system here. And the parasympathetic system is always to keep those functions during rest. So that is a system to calm you down. So after those dangers go away, and then you start to calm down your heartbeat, come back to the normal condition, your breath rate reduce, all those are a function of the parasympathetic system. So in fact, your body are either controlled mostly by those sympathetic system, or most of them are controlled by the parasympathetic system. Just depends on what your state is. In the resting stage, that's the parasympathetic. If it's in the active stage or stress or like scared, so those extreme condition, is a sympathetic system. So sympathetic system, sometimes we call it an alert system. It just alert the whole body. Let's have a look at those review questions here. While studying for an exam, you reach for a beverage. To extend your arm, which nervous system is active? So the answer is D, somatic. So if you see the afferent here, afferent is the direction go in, that is an input, equal to input. And if it's input, it's equal to sensory. So if you see the drink, that is afferent, that is sensory. But if you reach your arm and control your arm to get those drink, that will be somatic. And then autonomic, sympathetic, those are the involuntary control. Since you just extend your arm, that's a voluntary control. So the answer should be somatic. Next question. The door slams shut loudly and you flinched. After a few seconds, you realize that your heart is beating very rapidly and forcefully. This response is a result of your which nervous system? The answer is B. It's autonomic system. Okay, it just makes you involuntary control for the heart rate beating and also the strength of your heart beating. Okay, that's a forcefully. So think about that. If you just think more specific, is that sympathetic or parasympathetic in this condition? Is that parasympathetic or sympathetic in this condition here? It's a sympathetic. Sympathetic is an alert system. Every time your body gets alert, that is sympathetic.